Okay, and this would be a good sort of Q&A time. If you have any questions, now would be the perfect time to ask. And this will go on to the official recording for the class in case anybody needs to refer back to any answers or questions or anything like that. What I assume is that we can get through the Q&A, and at a certain point we turn a corner, and if you're going to work with Zoom on, you can work with Zoom on. If you want to work with Zoom off, and take off and work. But then I can answer individual questions after that, or even turn over the hosting to somebody else if they want to share their screen and get specific answers or specific troubleshooting done. Okay. So let's make this count for however you guys want to use it. But I see that's sort of usually how it plays out, right? Let's talk about questions and answers that I think everybody would benefit from hearing first, and then you know, I can stick around as people peel away. I can stick around and help individuals if needed. Okay. Everyone clear about the template and plugging things in? And I included an example. You know, I mean, you guys can do better than that, I'm no doubt. But you know, I will say one thing that might be helpful to sort of say to everybody. I noticed a lot of, first of all, some of you have some really interesting perspectives, but a lot of you, I think, your perspectives could be a lot more interesting, to be honest. And I think one of the issues that I see by and large, and it's not everybody, of course, but one of the issues I see by and large is it looks like your cone of vision, right, the lens length is set artificially high. And so it seems like a really sort of tight perspective, when in fact I would encourage you to go wider angle to make a more dynamic perspective that shows much more in the same viewport. Okay. Really quickly, I'm just going to share my screen and remind you guys of that, how to do that if you're like wondering what the crap is going on here. You see my screen? And I just changed the order of that. Let me just make sure that's saved before I close this. Sneak peek of what we'll be doing, some of what we will do in Project 2. All right, so I think by default, Rhino, here, let me just use my mouse, that would be easier. By default, I think Rhino, if you go to the viewport label, like perspective in this case, you go to viewport properties, brings up this box. I'll hold my cursor here for a minute so you can see where I'm doing. Select that label, the menu that pops up where you can select wireframe, shaded, X-ray, all that stuff. If you go all the way to the bottom viewport properties, it pops the viewport properties over my properties box over here on the right. So it tells you the title of the viewport, not a big surprise, it's perspective. But the lens length is something very much that we can change, and I would actually encourage you to do that. The human eye, if you take into consideration our sort of scope of how much we see, including out of focus peripheral vision, is more aligned with, like, the say 28 millimeter lens, right? 35 is pretty standard for, you know, sort of standard benchmark for SLRs, DSLRs. I'm actually going to go down to like 25. Okay, and that way, when I'm like underneath, let's say this grid shell in this case. In fact, let me make a more dense grid shell really quickly. This is a, let's see here, edit. Yeah, I'll run that. Why not? We'll make this more dense. Nothing better than making your own tools and then watching it execute them. This is where you drink your coffee and let the computer do all your work for you. Come on now, sometime today. 30 times 30, I suppose that's quite a few. And that'll work, that's a little better. That's a nicer looking shell here. So in other words, right, if you can tell the difference, let's say I'm underneath this thing or inside of it, right? You know, there's a big difference, I would say, between, let's say, the default lens length of 50 or something like that, right, versus something that's much much wider angle. I'd maybe even go down to like 20 or 15. in order to sort of see and feel like you're immersed within this sort of really lovely, in this case, grid shell. Freyato, eat your heart out. Anyway, so, right? So the more dynamic vantage point, and then what we see, in this case, the distortion of the perspective to go wide angle actually works to our advantage in making a more, I think, dynamic composition, okay? And again, don't be afraid to have some of this in the foreground, have some midground and background here. I know it's just a singular object, and so it's kind of hard to do this without sort of, the other thing I've noticed is that some of you, I've said 3 immersive perspectives, but honestly, I wouldn't mind sort of seeing just a perspective of the overall shape, right? That sort of really just sort of shows overall what we're looking at, okay? And some of you are doing that in the drawings, and some of you are doing that in the perspectives, and some of you are doing that in both, right? But you have some latitude, I would say, in sort of just making a really sort of nice design board here for this, lattice, something that you would really want to put in your portfolio. And that's the other that's the other prize you should be keeping your eye on, right? Always sort of think about, okay, how will this be a positive on a spread or a page of my portfolio to help me get into a good grad school, the Ivy Leagues or something, or get the great job at, I don't know, wherever, Skidmore or, somewhere else. And, so, keep that in mind, right? But I did want to make, sort of mention that, right? Because it make a big difference. Of course, this is not a lattice. Still sharing my screen. Oopsie. All right, more chats. Good morning, Josh. This is going to be recorded. Yes, this is being recorded at the moment. Should be anyway. It's recorded. Oh, thank you. I didn't see. Okay, all of those were just, okay. Is there a minimum amount of different views you want on the final product? No, that's a good question, David. I would shoot for, that's a great question. I don't have a single answer for it. So let me pull up the example. Yeah, let me just pull up the example and let's talk about that for a moment, because I want to make sure that's a great question, David. We should be more clear about that. I think this is in my. Sorry, I suddenly can't get to my downloads folder because Zoom is blocking half of the. Oh, that's weird. Always something here. Let me just open up Finder. Downloads, I believe. Yeah, here we go. So here's, for instance, the example I gave you, where I selected, let's say, one large perspective in the sampling of 3, depending on how much space I had left over. I wanted to make sure I had, as a baseline, some ortho views, some sort of exploded axon. In this case, I took the front view and exploded it, and sort of talked about the isoparms that I used to generate the isoparametric pattern that I used to generate each truss shape. So you can sort of see a part-to-whole relationship. And then down here, in this case, another diagram I made was just sort of showing different instances of, sort of baking different slider values, right? So this one is the less dense, this one's medium density, this one's getting there, and then this one's the max density as far as like the number of divisions, right? So the number of pieces and how dense they are. Okay. So I don't necessarily have an answer, except to say that you're trying to thread the needle between having enough information like this, but making sure that it fits nicely on the page and nothing looks too crowded or cramped. And I'd give myself like a B on this one. It's not the best, right? This was done very quickly, actually, to be honest with you. But to me, the key thing also is then you'll have to go in after you've resized everything and really take a critical look at the line weights to make sure that they're going to read, right? So You know, if this is too thick of a line weight, then suddenly you have to, you know, particularly when they get this small, then you might have to like sort of lower the line weights. You know, the difference between the axon at this scale versus the same axon at this scale, right? You're probably going to have to adjust the line weights accordingly to make it readable, right? Same thing when you look at the line weights here versus here. You can see I don't think I've actually adjusted those. Maybe I have. Maybe I have a little bit, but I would still argue that these could be adjusted down a little more, so that they're not so thick. The smaller versions all here on the right hand side. I'm trying to circle my cursor around, versus the larger one next door on the left here, right? That those line weights can be thicker because the overall drawing and the spaces in between the line work are greater and larger. Okay. But at a minimum, I would shoot for 3 ortho drawings, at least 1 diagram, at least 3 perspectives, right? So anything else that you add to that is icing on the cake, right? So we went over making 3 draft perspectives, three ortho views. We talked about diagrams, making a diagram, or in some options that you have for at least one diagram last time. So that's, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 drawings. You know, one of them being kind of large and taking precedence over the other. You know, on one side or the other, it's up to you. You know, the nice thing about this is, you know, and key to this is also sometimes when you're looking at a perspective view and the object isn't situated in space with a margin around it, right, but actually goes off the frame, you know, what I'd recommend is sort of thinking about, you know, how you deal with the frame of the poster and the frame of the frame edge of the perspective all at once, right? So in this case, I gave this, you know, a base that sort of ended at the bottom. And honestly, if I did this middle one over, if I'd done this middle one over, which I probably should have, I would have made sure that I just cut off from the bottom, and then I wouldn't have cut off the top here, and then just make sure that that's anchored to the bottom as well. And so, you know, and this one, of course, went on the edge because I have, you know, an edge here and an edge here. I couldn't do anything about the top edge. You know, sometimes you just got to make do with what you have here, and apply the grid, right? You know, suddenly, you know, I would say there's maybe a little more space here than I'd want versus here. So I'd want to slide that over and sort of recrop things to sort of make a 1, 2, 3. And that corresponds basically with the grid lines. Again, I put these grid lines, the guides on here in Illustrator. It's opening up right now. Okay, good. Close that. It's too tempting to read my emails when email clients open. I'm staring at my screen. I'm just waiting for Illustrator to, here we go, load. But the reason I put those guides on there is for you to follow them and to sort of see the modularity, right? So the nice thing about the grid is that, you know, I think this is broken down into 1.5 inch increments that can also make 3 by 3 modules or 3 by 4.5 modules, or, you know, however you want to do it, 6-inch modules, et cetera, right? So, you know, what I wouldn't do is, you know, I see this all the time. I don't know why, but I wouldn't, like, you know, put one here and then put one here diagonal up from it, right? Adhere to the grid, make it look nice and orderly. 1, 2, 3, right? You know, it's sort of, make sure you use those grid lines and you don't start staggering things. Let that grid become the ordering system that helps you lay everything out in a nice, neat way. That's just a general rule for everything. You guys should be used to that by now. I was gonna place, where's place? For, like, I could place an image. Why am I not? Oh, it's because, sorry. It's because I don't have an unlocked layer selected. Here we go. I'll make that the active layer. Just place a couple of examples here, maybe. Too many things. Let's see. Project it's Photos 5. Maybe that would be something I could plug in. No, that's lame. Well, yeah, I'll just leave it at that. I mean, but the idea is to really use this grid and to lay things out, okay, into columns and rows, and try to maintain those columns and rows as much as you can. Okay. Oh, I know what I was going to do. Open the PDF in Illustrator. Yeah, that would help. There we go. Maybe. Yeah. So here you can see that, you know, again, I was using, you know, trying to sort of fit things in columns. You know, here's a 2x3, here's a 1x3, here's a 3x3, 2x1, 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 right? Just extend it out over, you know, but again, you know, use those guides to your advantage to bring some order and organization. This is just that example I gave you guys, but I just opened up the PDF in Illustrator. You can see all the layers still preserved in the PDF, as well as the guides and things like that. So these guides, of course, they don't actually show up in the actual final document. They're just there when you open up an Illustrator as a visual cue for you to sort of snap to and bump to and use your keyboard arrows to sort of match things up and make sure edges align and things like that. Okay. So David, I don't know if that fully answered your questions, but I would say the minimum would be 7. Three perspectives, 3 ortho drawings, and a diagram would be the minimum. Okay. Yeah, no problem. It's a great question. Any other questions before maybe I turn it over to anybody that just has any questions or wants me to take a look at what they've done and get some feedback, or wants to share their Rhino or Illustrator screen because you're having an issue with something and want me to help out. I won't record that part, so at a certain point I'll just stop recording and I'll probably leave and come back just so that the video can post-process during the rest of the course. And that way that lets me get it up onto the yes, it's due on Monday. That lets me get it up onto Canvas quicker. Yes, so this is due Monday. So is that the 28th? Sounds like the 28th. And then we'll start project 2. Yay! Woo-hoo. I know you guys are thrilled by your blank expressions. And no, I'm just kidding. Yeah, no, project 2 is going to be dope. So it's a PDF file. Yep, totally. Yeah, you just save it as a PDF from Illustrator. And you know, if you guys don't have enough for me to do during the class time today, then I'll just get onto Canvas and start making the assignments, you know, so I can start linking things up. Will we be presenting these in class or just the submissions? You'll be submitting them, hopefully before class. Yeah, I think you should be submitting them right before class. The cutoff will be 10 a.m. And I will go through them and we'll just, you know, we'll look at them really quickly, but then I want to start looking at project 2. Okay. Is there a best way to make 2D? I tried doing it with settings you had and it crashed a few times before it worked. Make sure that you've restarted your machine. Windows has a tendency to run on a virtual memory if you have a lot of objects on your screen in Rhino. And depending on how you have your resources allocated, you know, like for me, it's different because I'm running, like when I run Rhino, I'm running it on Windows 10 through Parallels on top of Mac OS. And so I have to be careful about making sure that my settings, I give it enough oomph. I can step on the gas pedal when I throw lots and lots of geometry at it, because those files start to get heavy. It has to remember all that stuff constantly as you move it around and redraw it as you change your vantage point on the screen. So even that sometimes can be a chore. And then when it has to try to, you know, calculate normals and points and lines and connecting things, it can get pretty computationally intensive. The Make 2D, what I recommend doing is avoiding scene silhouette if you have to, and any hidden lines or anything like that, and just get the basic drawing out if you're having problems because the drawing's so large. Or I like to do a share screen with you if possible. Yeah, I'll go ahead and let you set that up right now while I'm still talking to Clayton. Make host. I'm going to make you the host, Alex. So don't leave. Okay, there we go. And from there, then you'll have a simpler drawing. You won't be able to sort of make a scene silhouette with larger, like thicker line weights. But a certain size, maybe that's moot anyway. That'll do it. I just need to remember to turn off all my. Yeah, I mean it's memory, right? So to create different line weights in the lattice pipes, do we just bake the components we want to at a thicker radius? I tried to do this, but it wasn't really showing up as a different thickness for me. Okay, so the when you bake into Grasshopper, that's good. Another good question, Ashley. When you bake something in a Grasshopper, you're baking like the cylinders, right? The pipes. And so, for instance, I've been making the crisscross webbing, the webbing members, the smaller parts of the trusses in Lattice, smaller in diameter. And I've been making the sort of longer lateral cords, a little thicker in diameter. That has nothing to do with line weights, but it does just sort of give, a sort of hierarchy to the structural members based off of like how they would need to perform. Now, if they're all the same size on yours, that's fine. But I would say that's another thing I noticed. A few of you seem like the pipes were maybe a little larger than I would want, relative to how much they're spanning. Okay. And this example that Alex is showing is a nice example of sort of having a nice ratio of the length of the span for each of these struts and the thickness of each of the struts. That looks like a nice ratio right there. When it comes to line weights, then when you do the Make 2D, typically if you're going to adjust any line weights, it would be if you have some projection lines or something like that, like to show something how it explodes or pulls off or something, then you would maybe tone those down, maybe even change their line type to a dashed line. Or if you have the scene silhouette, if you're fortunate enough to get that to work with all of the stuff that the Make 2D has to draw, then you would probably beef up that scene silhouette just a little bit with the line weights. Okay, so I'm not exactly sure which one of those you wanted me to address. I try to address both of them, Ashley. I'm not sure, but follow up if I'm still not being clear. In the meantime, Alex, what are you up to? Look at this. Okay, we got some Grasshopper going on here. Okay, so we got a helix. So how'd you generate your helix? That's kind of cool. Did you use like cosines and sines and like did you guys ever take?
Sorry, I was trying to figure out how to get my thing to. I'm like trying to mess with everything and it just won't let me get to my my thing. So sorry.
That's all right.
No, I was trying to make. So this is also what took me forever, was trying to figure out how to get it to do a spiraling shape that's in a circle. So it took me hours to figure out until I finally decided how I was going to do it, and I just meshed the surface eventually. But I was trying to do it the hard way by figuring out just to like learn Grasshopper by actually trying to make a make a system in which I could do a cell spiraling, so I didn't have to do the rendered surface like that. I mean, but it just wasn't working. So I just made the mesh surface and then did the wireframing. But also it's taking my laptop ages to render, so I literally have to do it overnight, which is why I haven't been able to put my submissions in, because it was taking longer than expected to render. But I just wanted to get feedback on places that it can improve, because I want to make sure that the final model is kind of where we're going. Or
this is fine. One thing I would recommend when it comes to the rendering part is once you have this model set, just select here. Let me get my let me put up the annotate tools here. Oh, it keeps moving.
Oops, sorry, I'll stop moving. Let me zoom out for you.
Yeah, this is good right here, or wherever it's at.
Okay.
All right, so what I would do is I would select just these objects and then export selected and export them as their own just Rhino file without anything else in it. That'll make the file a little less heavy, and then Rhino will be able to allocate more of its resources to just rendering this stuff and not having to worry about any of the other stuff in the file. So you can still keep this file with all of the sort of process geometry and things like that,
Mm-hmm.
make a separate final file with just the geometry you want to render.
Okay.
And that'll help a little bit with performance. The other thing is to look at the size and then the quality. If you're using anything above draft quality, it's going to take a while.
Okay.
And then, of course, the viewport window size, again, also makes a difference. You haven't changed any of the shaders or anything with the materials, if you're just using the generic white
I
plaster
am.
or
I didn't
something?
know. Should we change it, or is
No,
it an
no,
option?
because
Okay.
if you start adding reflections, then the time increases exponentially, right? The more
Okay.
bounces the light has to calculate through.
Okay. But I'm in the right area for figuring out what the project should end up being.
Yeah, and
This will
what I
work.
would also say is, to me, I'd want to be like inside of this for one of these, like
I
looking through this.
have a
Can you
render.
take me there? Just try to like move us in there or something, or just yeah. Let me clear out this.
So far, this is the only render I've been able to get finished.
Yeah. Okay. So that's looking at the object.
Yeah,
But
I was
getting
gonna do
inside of
one
it.
up here. I was gonna do one up here, looking straight down, as
Oh,
one of the options.
like here's my eye, and I'm looking
Yeah,
this way.
yeah, looking inside the spiral itself, and probably be like just
Okay.
somewhat inside of it, so you feel like
Then
you're.
I would also put someone here looking down this tube, and I would put maybe someone up on top of this with this over top of me, and this is the floor underneath me.
Okay. Okay, that
And
makes
get
sense.
a couple of really nice shots where it's like, people are occupying this as a spatial construct. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. And look, try turning down the quality and the size, and see what difference that makes. At least to sort of test a few things before you set it to render overnight or something, right? Or for a few hours or whatever it is.
Okay. How do I make you host again?
Cool. Here, I'll just reclaim it from you.
Oh, okay.
Already done. Thank you. What level of quality should the renders be? You're going to have to look. You have to find the sweet spot. It depends on the complexity of your model and how much computational power you have and how much time you have. To me, it'd be awesome to get really, really super high level, high quality, well lit, ungrainy renderings. But sometimes, look, I mean, you'll have to find, the spot in between, sort of looking at the trade-offs between time versus quality. It's always that trade-off, time versus quality, right? So, I think that'll differ or vary between each of you and each of your systems that you're running your software on. But as high as you can, realistically, right? Oh, good questions. Good questions. Well, with that, I think I'm going to turn the recording off. And Alex, I'm going to make you host one more time. Or no, maybe Albert. I'll make you host. You're at the top of my list here because alphabetical. I'll be right back. Like, I'll be gone for 30 seconds. I'll come right back in. That'll help me get the video processing. And then we can do more troubleshooting. So